Hey everybody, Nigel with you here, Nigel's Modelling Bench. Welcome back to part 3 of this beginners build series or beginners series, and hopefully you're finding some use in this, the newer modelers out there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And also, if some of you just want to say it's all a bit too slow and that, I'm sure if you look in the comments there's going to be some that are saying this is great and wish somebody had done it before. So I've just given Jess a bath, so I think I'm covered in hairs, which isn't a good thing, is it? So anyway, right, so what we're going to do, we are going to today cover gluing parts together. Now, gluing parts together may sound like a very, very simple subject. There's a hell of a lot of variations you can do, there's a hell of a lot of different materials you can use, and there's a lot of different ways of doing it. So basically what we're going to cover today is gluing parts together and cleaning up seams. So not only seams on parts where you've glued them together and you make a seam, but also mould seams. As we know, the sprues are made up of two mould halves coming together and going apart, and they leave a seam. There's always going to be a join line. Some kits have massive ones, some kits have tiny ones. This being a fairly new tool, they're going to be very, very small, but sometimes you also get mismatch. So like this part here, this round part is made in two mould halves. So there's going to be a seam line down the middle of both sides. Okay, so obviously you've got the mould comes together like this, and you have this circular orifice in there which gets filled with plastic, the mould opens, and you end up with your part. Now obviously where the joins are here and here, okay, you're going to get a seam because you're never going to get an absolutely perfect match. Sometimes some kits also have misalignment, so the tool may be worn, the guide pins may be worn, so you end up with misalignment. So instead of having a perfectly round part, I know my arms aren't perfectly round, but instead of a perfectly round part, you have this sort of thing. So you end up with like two D's glued together, if you like, one backwards. So therefore you get a bigger seam to deal with. Now, these hairs are getting on my bloody nerves now. So basically, what we're going to do is glue these parts together. So what we're going to glue them with, first thing we'll do is test fit them. Test fit everything before you glue it together. Never just assume that parts are going to fit. And you can see that inside here there were some big ejector pin marks that had to be cut out, so we've removed them. Remember, we looked at ejector pins in part 2, so we've got hair on there. So basically these parts go together like this, and as you can see they align quite well. So on this one we'll leave those alignment pins in. We have the pins in here, we have the holes in there and the pins on here, and they obviously line up and they're quite good. So what we're going to use to glue it together, so if you remember back in the old days, you got the old tube glue in a tube, which I haven't even got any here now, I don't think. Not worth using. It's an absolute waste of time. Don't bother with it. It's stringy, it's thick, it's just don't use it. And the glue you get in the Airfix starter kits, don't use that either. I find it doesn't even melt the plastic. It's probably health and safety or something, but it's, in my opinion, it's useless. So if you want to use a glue that's not liquid, that's going to be in a brush, not in a brush, probably your best one is this one. And unfortunately, I've lost the label up. This is Revell Contactor. And it comes in a little applicator. You've got a little steel tube on there, which always gets blocked up. You can unblock it with a piece of wire. Or you can use, I've seen people use cigarette lighters on them. I don't recommend that. It's a fire hazard. But you've basically got this liquid glue in here. I personally don't like these applicators. They're quite hard to control in my opinion. So what I do, I've got an old Tamiya bottle and I've got my Revell Contactor in there. So you've got it to apply with a brush rather than apply with that needle. You don't have the problem with it all drying up and everything. So that's what I've done there. These old Tamiya bottles, if you get Tamiya extra thin, this one here, this is the go-to cement for most modelers. Never throw the bottles away because they're really, really handy. So that's your first option. This is the more regularly off the shelf available item. And if you get like a Revell starter kit, this is what you get rather than the glue you get in an Airfix starter set, which is just throw it away. It's just useless in my opinion. So Revell Contactor, you can use this one and you can brush it on first. You've also got here, we have this, in fact I'll show you these first. This is the Mr. Hobby lineup. So you've got Mr. Cement S, Mr. Cement SP, Mr. Cement Deluxe and Mr. Cement SPB. And you can see this one here is black. It's a bit of a gimmick. It's so you can see where the glue is. I find it's not a very good cement. It doesn't seem to melt the plastic as nicely as any of these three. Mr. Hobby Cement S is just basically basic. It's just like Tamiya Extra Thin. If you can't get Tamiya Extra Thin, get this. It's the same stuff. The beauty of this one is it has a much bigger brush. If you look at the brush you've got in there compared to the Tamiya one, it's much bigger. It holds a lot more glue. So if you glue in big parts together like a pair of ship hull halves or something like that, this I find a lot better because you get more glue in there. But the actual, I call it glue, it's actually cement. The actual cement itself is pretty much the same. SP is the same as Tamiya Quick Setting, which we'll look at in a minute. Basically the same thing, but it dries a lot faster. So I find, I had a discussion with James over at Boldly Go Model Works about this once, and in my opinion, a normal glue, because it doesn't actually stick the plastic together, it welds it together. What it does, it melts the plastic, and then when we push the parts together, they meld together, the word is. They melt and weld at the same time. So they're not actually gluing together, they're melding together. So obviously, a glue like this is not quick drying. So with this one, it is quick drying. So basically, you put the parts together, and boom, it's dried. It doesn't have as long as it does with this one for all the stuff that's just under the table now. It doesn't have as long for all the parts to sort of intertwine and, you know, weld together, if you like. So if you're after a good strong joint, I would avoid this one or the Extra Thin Quick Setting. The Mr. Cement Deluxe is a thicker version, so it's one you can kind of brush on first. As you can see, it's a little bit thicker. It's not thin and runny like the others. It's a little bit thicker, so you can brush it on first. Again, great if you put in a great big, you know, whole side on a tank or something. You can brush that on first and then put it on. And then I say the Mr. Cement SPB, it's just the same thing, but it's coloured black. Bit of a gimmick, I think. I got it because I had a Premium Hobbies 4-bot holder, so I got it for that reason. So this is all available from Premium Hobbies, everything I'm showing you here. I don't think he does the contactor, but he does all the others. And then here we've got our three Tamiya glues. We've got the Extra Thin Quick Setting, normal Extra Thin, and then this is not Extra Thin, this is, oh, what's it called? I think it's just called, yeah, it's just called White Top. And basically this is Quick Setting, this is normal glue, and this is a thicker glue. And as you can see, this is one that's thick. The brush you get in there is huge. So what I recommend is when you've got an old Tamiya pot empty, you can literally just take the brush out of the lid and push it onto the white top, and then you'll have a smaller brush for applying the glue. So again, it's the same with these three: Extra Thin Quick Setting, Extra Thin, White Top, quickest setting, medium, slowest setting. This is if you can only afford one pot of glue, or you only want to buy one pot of glue, that is the one to get. And if you can't get that, because it sometimes does kind of get very hard to get hold of, get the Mr. Cement S. Okay, that's my recommendation. The quick setting is great. If you watch my video on the truck, you'll see I use quick setting on the chassis sometimes, just to quickly tack parts together because things don't want to go together well or something. You can see the chassis here is built now. So right, so how do we actually glue the? Of course, the other option then is super glue. You've got your super glues you can use. This is Flexi 5K CA from VMS, again available from Premium Hobbies here. Don't forget to use your code NMB10 if you want your 10% off. I would be happy using this to glue parts together. I don't recommend using super glue for all your building, because basically, hang on a second, sorry about that guys. Right, so I would happily use VMS super glue to glue stuff together, although I don't recommend it. It's better to use a Wild Action glue. If you build a resin kit, I'm afraid you're stuck with super glue or 5-minute epoxy or whatever, but really I would tend to not use super glue to glue parts together. It's great as a filler, but I tend to find it can go brittle and parts can start to break. So the options we have: if we're going to use a thick cement or something like Revell Contactor, we hold on to the part and we put the glue around and then we push the parts together. Again, as I showed you with the sanding, then if you have difficulty holding the part or it's small or whatever, you can put the part onto a piece of white tape like that and then go around with the glue, and then you can pick your other part up and plonk it on just like so. Okay, You can also do this if you're going to do the parts like I'm going to do it here, and what I'm doing is using extra thin, and I'm going to use capillary action to pull the parts together. So this is the way I recommend doing your parts. So hold your parts together, and then bloody hairs, I've got a hair on this brush. Just hold your parts together and just put a drop of glue in, okay, and it will capillary along the join. Okay, so all I've done is that bit between those two holes, and you should be able to see, if I give it a squeeze, you can see in there is a wet joint of glue sticking out. You can see it's capillaried along, okay, and it's glued that all the way along between those two holes. So then with that bit there, I can just now check the parts, check the alignment, make sure everything's all nicely lined up. If you need to pull it into shape or something, you can use tweezers just to make it pull round or whatever. Okay, and then what we can do, we've got a little gap there, we can put some glue in there and it will pull it in. The little gap will pull the glue into all the joints, so you'll see that when I squeeze it, you can see we've got glue coming out all the way along there. Do the same along here. What you can do is just brush it along the seam, place it into the seam just like so, just like that, and then put it together. What I'm going to do now is with a couple of pegs, a couple of ordinary clothes pegs, clamp it together, and make sure when you clamp it together the peg doesn't pull it out of line. It's so easy to just come along and go bang, plonk it on and put it down, and then you find what's happened is the peg has pulled it out of line. So put your peg on, you can see that one's been pulled out of line, look. So I can push it back into line again and then re-peg it, just like so. And there we go. So that's all clamped together now, and we could just leave that to dry for, I don't know, it's not a major component, but I would be tempted to leave it for about at least an hour before you start messing with it. Now if you're in a rush, if you want to get on with your build, what you could do is glue them together with super glue, and then you can work on the joint straight away then. But the other thing you can do is with the little fingernails I've got, you can use your fingernail and just go round and feel the step. Okay, and I can feel, like, if I go either way, I can feel a little ridge, and that's good. If you go one way, like I can see this area here, doesn't seem to be particularly well lined up. If you look here, you can see there's a big step there. So basically, I can feel there's a step there. If I come this way, I can feel nothing. And what that is, that's a fault in the part, because on this side I have no step either way. So we're going to leave that side with the step, because all this lines up nicely, that bit there doesn't. So we'll have some clean up to do there. Okay, so there we are. So I can peg those together and just leave them to dry. Right, so while that's drying, I'm going to talk about seam cleanup, and this is mould seam cleanup. Now, as I say, this kit is new, so they're very small, but I don't know if you can see that on there, but there is a seam. If I get my black pen again, and draw a line along that seam, I should be able to go over it lightly with a sponge, and it should reveal you should be able to see on there now there's like a seam. Have a look on your parts, you'll see the seam that I'm talking about. And what we want to do is get rid of that seam. Now what a lot of people do on round parts, they go straight in with a sponge. Okay, I don't recommend that. I recommend going in with something harder. The problem I find, if you have, let me grab a piece of paper. If you have, so you've got a round part like this, and it's got a seam like that on it, okay? I know what you're thinking. If you use a sponge, as you can see, the sponge will conform to whatever shape you sand. And what I find is, as you rub over there, the sponge will touch here, here and here. And what you will end up with, exaggerated, you'll end up with something like that. Okay, exaggerated. It would be actually more like that sort of thing. But it doesn't take that nib off. What you want to do is get rid of that. So what I do is come in with a hard stick first, okay, and just very lightly sand to remove the seam. And the black pen is a good guide to see when the seam is gone. Okay. And then when you've done that, you can come in with a sponge and sand it. Okay, and the beauty of a sponge, it will actually put a radius. If you've managed to sand a flat onto it, then it will put a radius where the flat was. And here we're going to remove that sprue nib. And hopefully you can see there where I've sanded it, you can see a line. Hopefully there you can see a line, and that is the actual mould seam that we're trying to get rid of. So just getting rid of that sprue nib there. The other way to get rid of seams is to scrape them. So you can come along with a knife and just gently scrape them. You can also get all sorts of different tools like this one here. These are seam scrapers. I think they're a bit gimmicky, to be honest, but you can get in there and scrape with that. It's just a piece of stainless steel, to be honest. But what we can do then is, again with the pen, to see if we've got a witness there of a seam, you just come along there, put the pen on, and then just sand it. And you can see there we've got an edge that isn't disappearing, we've got a black line. So we're going to come in with the harder stick just to get rid of it. And you can see what I'm doing is turning the part while I'm going, so I don't end up just sanding one area. Just get in there, get rid of that piece of paper. Okay, and there you go. Now if you happen to have an Airfix 1/24 scale Typhoon, if you look at the tubing that the cockpit is made of, it's got some very, very bad mould seams on it, very large. And luckily the plastic is very soft. So if you want to practice this, get that kit out and have a go, because honestly that is like a day's work if you want to get rid of all the seams on that. Because the worst thing about seams is the part being depicted is a tube, like this is a pipe, tube, whatever you want to call it. If you leave it there, leave the seam, when you paint it, when you put a wash on, the wash will pick up on the seam and it ends up looking like a piece of plastic rather than a piece of tube. So it's best to get rid of those seams. I'm just getting rid of that sprue nib there. We've got a bit of something going on the back there, a little bit of a sink mark by the look of it. We'll just sand the rest of it flat. And then we'll have a seam up there, and we'll have a seam on there, and then we can go over that again with a sponge just to take away any edges. And there we are. So there's that part de-seamed. Just another 3 to go, and we're away. Right, so this has been sat for about an hour now. Jess has had a nice walk, and I'm all de-haired, hopefully. So that's all nice secured and ready to sand the seams. So as you can see, we have a seam which has got some glue on it, so you've got like a raised edge. So I'm going to use my Infini sanders here, the PE sanders, and I'm just first of all going to remove the sprue nib. Now if you notice, I'd left the sprue nibs in place. I didn't remove them before I glued the parts together. Reason being, when you've got two halves, two cylindrical parts like this going together, if you remove the sprue nib, you run the risk of actually putting an undercut in there, and then you're going to sand it again when you do the seam. So you may as well just do it all together. And again, if you notice, I'm not using a soft stick, I'm using a hard stick, and I'm not using any pressure. And what I'm trying to do is just get rid of that step, that little slight step that's there. Go right into the corner, and there you go. You can see now that that step is all but gone. Now on the other side, actually we still do have a bit of a step there. On the other side, if you remember, we have a much bigger step. So what I'm going to do here is, rather than just sand it flat, I'm going to start on the side that's up. So you can see here, this side is higher than that side. So if I just sand it flat, I'll end up making like a D shape. So what I'm going to do is start on this side. What you can do is you can use a marker again to show you what I'm doing. Okay, so I've got marker there the other side of the line, and I've got marker there this side of the line, and it's this side of the line I'm sanding. So what I'm doing is coming around. Now the correct way to do this, the correct way to file is like that. Okay, a lot of people do this. That's incorrect. The correct way to do it is like that. Okay, so like that. And what I'm doing here, I'm just swiping one way, coming back to the straight and then going over on the side. And if you notice, I'm swiping at 45 degrees. What I'm doing is just removing plastic from this side, not that side. So I'm trying to keep a cylindrical shape going. As you can see now, we're starting to remove the pen from the seam. So that means the seam has all but gone. There we go. So there we are. That's that step pretty much gone. Right. So you can see we've got a bit of an undercut there. We've got a little bit of something going on here as well. So what I'm going to do, just like we did with our ejection pin marks, drop a super glue. I'm going to have to get some more super glue in there. Hang on. This is the black thin. Okay, drop a super glue in our Pringles lid, and then what I'm going to do is just put some along there. Nothing too much, just a little drop, and put some along there. You can use Mr. Surfacer if you want to, but super glue dries faster and it dries harder. It doesn't shrink after you paint it. If you remember, this is what we said with the ejection pin marks. I will keep repeating myself because not everybody will watch all the videos. And as I said, I don't want to waste any of this, so just rather than spray a load on there, I could just touch that on there. In fact, I think I'm going to have to spray it on there because it doesn't seem to want to play ball. There we go. Just touch that on there, and that will make that cure a lot faster. In the meantime, you can see that I've also here, I've put super glue on the ends of these pipes because they had sink marks in them. Now, I can't find another part that's got a sink mark in it to show you right now, but I will in a future video. But basically, where you get a lump of plastic moulded, as it cures, it shrinks back, and because it's got a high volume of plastic in that area, it will shrink back and get a sink mark. And you'll see after this is sanded what I mean. What it's doing is it's just leaving super glue in the middle. Okay, so that's filled that sink mark, and it wasn't really necessary to do because what it's underneath, and I don't think it's correct anyway. I don't think this is actually how it should be, but it's how they've made the model. So, and I'm not going to start changing things around. So that's those sink marks filled in, so they're done. Now this should have cured by now. It's still a little bit soft. I'm going to leave that to go off a little bit harder, and then I'll come back and we'll finish off sanding it. Okay, so that seam's all dry now, so now we can sand it. So once again, with the hard sander, not putting any pressure on, I'm just, as you see, 45 degrees, keep turning the part, and just go over, just like so. When we come to the ends, we have to go straight because we need to sand the ends. And there you can see that basically we're removing the super glue, but leaving a bit behind in that seam. And now we have, this is what's called a skinny sponge. Now these were available for Flory models and they are no longer available, unfortunately. What you can buy now are these, and these come from Premium Hobbies again. They're made by Big Ammo. The biggest problem I find with these is they don't have like a 400 grit. They go straight from 320 straight to 1200, which is very coarse. So it goes fairly coarse, which is this one here, which is fairly coarse, okay, really too coarse for using on this, but hopefully what we can do is just keep using it and wearing it out and it will get finer. But we can use it for that. But these, if you can find them anywhere, then you're lucky. These are Flory skinny sponges. You could maybe try cutting up one of the Infini ones and making it into a skinny one. I don't know, but at the moment there is nobody, Flory has stopped making these and nobody else has taken the place with them. So I'm showing you something here that you probably won't be able to get, but you may already have some if you're very, very lucky. So we can just sound like that, and we can return the round shape without, I'm going to go back to my hard one to clean up that seam, and that's just going to get rid of any flats or anything that are there. And now we should have a completely invisible seam. So that's how we go about doing that. Now the same on here. On the outside diameter here we had sprue nibs connecting them. So what we can do there is just go lengthways on that side. We can't do it on the back because those pipes are in the way. But just remove those sprue nibs and remove at the same time removing the seam, just like so. And then on the outside we can use the sponge, we can use the hard stick, we could scrape it with a knife, we can do all sorts, just getting rid of that seam on there. Now obviously this part isn't that important, it's underneath the front of the truck, it's hidden behind a guard. But again, I'm showing you how to do this as if it was, you know, something really prominent right on the top of the truck or something. There we go. Just like that. There we are. And then that's about that. There is really no more to do on that particular piece. But as I say, this is like a beginner's guide. You can watch me do this, but you can also go and watch various builds that I do. You can watch the build of this truck that I'm doing. I'm currently halfway through filming part 1, which is the chassis construction. And then we can just get in there, just clean that out. And then if you want to, what you can do is give it a coat of primer, brush some Mr. Surfacer on or whatever, just as a little litmus test, just to see that you're not going to get a seam in there. I'm just going to go in with a knife just to make sure we can establish a nice sharp corner in there. And there we are. That's that done. And it's all seam free. We've got rid of all the mould seams on them. So now we can get on with construction. So if you want to see this being put together, go watch part 1 of the Scammell Commander build and you'll see it. Okay, so here's another bit I'm sort of editing in at the end. I wasn't intending to do this, but it's a great part of seam removal. Usually a bit let down in trucks or cars with leaf springs or whatever. As you can see on here, there's a seam down the middle. Now this is actually quite nice. Normally these springs are full of sink marks, and there's a great big seam and it's often got steps and everything. So it's best to get rid of them. I'm going to show you how I go about doing that now. Now if you don't want to do this, if you're just going to cover everything in mud and everything, it doesn't really matter. But I always think that when you do this and then you put a black wash on to pick out the leaf springs and stuff, it picks up on that horrible seam. And as I say, this one is pretty small. Normally they're a disaster. So I've done one side of this just initially. So I'm going to show you how you get there. There's a couple of different ways you can do this. You could use sanding sticks, but the trouble with sanding sticks, they've never got a really hard, sharp edge. So this is where files come in. And these are the diamond taper files, again from Infini. Again, you can get them from Premium Hobbies. And again, use NMB10 for 10% off. So I'm going to use the larger ones here. But these things are really, really nice because, you can see they're £16. I'm going to use the super fine. But they're really, really nice because they've got a very, very square edge on them, and they're also tapered down really thin, so they're great for like getting into slots. I mean, if this was the narrow one, if you want to get into that slot there or that slot there to open it up, they're great for doing that. In fact, I won't use the super fine, I'll use the fine because it will get the job done a little bit quicker and it'll be a little less boring for you. as you can see, we've got this very square edge. So what we're going to do, we're going to come along. In fact, what I'm going to do, so you can see what we're doing, once again I'm going to get the old pen out. Okay, I'm just going to go across and make sure we got absolutely covered in pen. You could do this as well for a guide, but I'm doing this mainly so that you can see what I'm actually removing. So just let that dry a minute. It's not dry yet. Don't go clogging the file up with ink and everything, do we? Well, the beauty of these is you can wash them out. You can get some of your tool cleaner, Mr. Hobby tool cleaner, brilliant stuff for cleaning your airbrush out, and clean all these files up after. So basically, as you can see there, because we've got black on there, it's a bit shiny, you can see the big seam line on there. So what I'm going to do is get the file, get it nice, make sure it's flat, and again, just that single stroke action. Don't go giving this, because you'll go way too deep, and if you start to go off on an angle, you won't spot it. Okay, so get those shackles as well. So you can see there that what we're doing is removing, after one stroke, you can see there there's some sinkage around that seam line. So we're just going to sand through that so it ends up being nice and flat. It's actually clogging this file up, this plastic. We should be able to unplug it by wiping on our jeans. You can see how it's building up in there. I think it's actually the pen that's clogging it, because when I did the other one it didn't clog. So there we are, and then we get that shackle as well, get rid of the seam on there. And just keep going until the seams disappear. Now you could use your glass clear files for this. Got the medium one here. If you've got the glass clear files, you could use these to finish off, or you could use them totally and nothing else, because again these have got the nice hard sharp edge. And then what we're going to do now is just go over and do in fact I'll use the file for this. I'm going to go over and just file the ends of each leaf just to square them up. There we are, and again I'm just going to go in there just to get rid of that little bit of seam that I can see. And on the edge of this shackle there's a tiny little step. So I'm going to get in and get that as well. The same on that one there. It's not a shackle, is it? It's like a bracket that holds the leaves together. So there you can see we have pretty much annihilated those seam lines. Completely gone. So now when we come along to put a wash on there, the wash won't pick up on that horrible seam line and look awful. It will just, and on the ends here you can see the seam lines continuing around on the end. So we're going to sand that off as well, or file that off. Just get rid of the whole lot of it. Okay, so there you can see that's pretty much entirely gone. Then the last little step, this is going a bit advanced now if you want to do it, but I always do it. Come on the end of the knife and just scrape across the end of each leaf, and what that'll do, it'll put a tiny little undercut in the end and just give somewhere else for the wash to go, to pick up on the ends of those leaves, because remember these are all separate pieces of metal, all just sat there, you know, overlapping each other, so they would have a nice join there between each one. So there you are, you can see there that we're completely now seam free, and what we'll do is the same on the other side. So again we can use the file, you can see the ink coming out of the file there. Just get rid of those seams in there, just like so. Okay, and there we are. And then with a sponge, I'll use this skinny sponge again, we can just wipe over these round parts here just to get rid of the seam on them. And then in the ends where you can't get in there, what we'll do, we'll get in with a knife and just scrape the seam away. Same up in there. Scrape the seam away up in there, and the same on this side. There we go. And I know some of you will be thinking, what a load of faff, what a load of fuss. But this could be, if you're entering a competition, this could be the difference between you winning and losing a competition. If the other person's done it and the judge notices and you haven't, guess who's going to win? And believe me, I'm not going to mention any names as I said earlier, but I have seen an absolutely beautiful build of a very large bomber aircraft, and it was featured in a magazine, and there was lots of pictures of the interior all done up with plywood and all the special effects. Really, really beautiful, beautifully built. And the damn thing was covered in ejector pin marks. Didn't bother sanding them out. I couldn't believe my eyes. But there we are, that's that one. That's that done. And as you can see, it looks a lot better than the one with the seam lines on it. And as I say, this is a very poor example to use really, because it's a very new kit and the seam lines are tiny. Go and look at it. It's an Airy 1/24 scale Scania kit and you'll see what I mean. These are very nice indeed. So that's one done, one to do. So I hope you enjoyed that. As I say, this has been edited in piece at the end. So I'm now going to return back to my original goodbye bit, and I'll see you, as I said at the end of that one, I'll see you for part 4. So let's return back to the original edit. There I've covered seam removal and some simple filling. We will cover more in another video, I would imagine, because this has been fairly simple. But this is just an insight, and as I see fit, if we do something bigger where we're going to use all sorts of different methods for filling and sanding and everything, then I will cover that in another video. But I don't know when that will be yet, because I don't know when I'm going to get to it. But there we go. So that's part 3. Part 4 will be all about planning your build. So hopefully you'll be around to watch that one. I'll see you soon for that one. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.